This is Norway. Everyone says to be a wealthier country, you have to exploit, oppress, and manipulate your own citizens and even other countries. That is not the case for Norway. This is how Norway became wealthy, by being humane. To understand how Norway went from being a poor country to becoming one of the wealthiest countries in the world by being humane, we need to look at its history. The history of Norway has been influenced to an extraordinary degree by the terrain and the climate of the region. Everyone was valuable, and the cutthroat style of business didn't sit right with them. This led to a more decentralized distribution of wealth and ownership throughout Norway. This then influenced the country's economy for centuries. Unlike many countries in the Western world, Norway was building up something different, despite being classified relatively poor. So, how did Norway keep its structure in the modern world? Year after year, leader after leader, these values and instincts remained ingrained within the fabric of Norway. As the system of governance grew, it grew with the same principle. The Norwegian government believes that all its resources are owned by Norwegians and for Norwegians. Everyone is equal, full stop. And it worked. Perhaps something that would further show the equality of Norwegian society was something that happened even when oil was discovered. During the 1973 oil crisis, an iconic moment involving King Olav V of Norway occurred. Despite being exempt from the driving ban, he chose to support the regulations by taking the tram instead of his car. Dressed in skiing attire, he sat on the passenger seat and offered to pay for his ticket like any other passenger, showcasing the king's commitment to his people. King Olav must have realized, though, that it was through gestures like this that made Norway's GDP per capita surpass that of Greece, Portugal, and Spain by the end of the 1890s, and by 1938 its GDP per capita had already surpassed those of the United Kingdom, Germany, and France. But the true test of the Norwegian system was yet to come. It would come in the form of oil, and it almost corrupted Norwegian society. But one man stood up. On May 29, 1952, gas was discovered in Groningen in the Netherlands. Enthusiasm was very high among the countries around the North Sea. Oil was later discovered right on the Norwegian shelf. The true test of the Norwegian system of life and economy has now begun. American cutthroat approach to life and business would soon be demonstrated immediately. Phillips Petroleum Company, an American oil company that started business in 1917, sent an application to the Norwegian authorities for exploration here in the North Sea. It wanted a license for the parts of the North Sea that were on Norwegian territory. It wanted an exclusive right and offered to pay $160,000 per month to the Norwegian government. But who would challenge this? A man by the name Einar Gerhardsen was the Norwegian Prime Minister at that time. By all accounts, he was a true product of the Norwegian egalitarian and cooperative society. He rose from the leadership of the Workers' Union and was a member of the City Council of Oslo. Einar stated that every single resource of the country is owned by Norwegians and for Norwegians. There was no way one company would have absolute control. That contrasts sharply with the Danes, for instance, who gave Danish shipowner A.P. Møller an exclusive concession to their whole continental shelf. Yet even with all the attempts of the Norwegian government not to allow Norwegian resources to be controlled by foreign companies would soon dominate the exploration of oil and gas here. With the Ekofisk discovery in 1969, the Norwegian oil adventure had begun and foreign companies were having a feast. It was uncharacteristic of Norwegians. The collapse of Norwegian society was inevitable. Although the drilling of oil and gas admittedly wasn't the expertise of Norway, Norwegians couldn't bear it. They wouldn't just sit around and watch. This caused a storm within the Norwegian parliament and all hell broke loose. In the early 70s, Norwegian politics was tested by fire. Between 1970 and 1973, Norway would have 3 different prime ministers. But the solution would come in the form of a young Norwegian lawyer and economist by the name Arve Johnsen. Arve presented a report outlining what he and the government committee deemed should be the framework for a Norwegian oil policy. Arve was not just a trained lawyer, he was also a man deeply rooted in social democratic values, a major characteristic of Norwegian society. 2 years later, a Norwegian state-owned oil company was created called Statoil, and Arve was appointed as the CEO. Unlike Britain, which later sold its own national oil company for quick cash, Norway's state oil company forged on, with a vested interest in every single aspect of oil and gas exploration. Norwegians' non-tolerance for giving up control of what's for all Norwegians was later amplified that year when it went to a referendum. They rejected a proposal to join the European Union. They would later again reject that proposal in 1994. Norway was back on track. The oil test was now over. Commitment to its people, alive or unborn, in prison or on the streets, was not questionable to Norwegian politicians, even as oil windfall came. With this, Hermod Skanland, a man born in Tromsø, proposed something genius in 1983. Hermod was no politician. He was a respected economist who had worked as a finance minister. Hermod proposed the creation of a fund where the government can store the current temporary rush of oil revenue. It was a great idea that sits well with Norwegian culture. Hermod would later become the governor of the Central Bank of Norway in 1985. And need I say, he was also the son of a schoolteacher. With Hermod still the governor, Norway's parliament passed a law to establish the Government Petroleum Fund, also known as the Oil Fund. The fund has now grown into the world's biggest sovereign wealth fund, a behemoth of $1.6 trillion today. 2 of London's most famous streets are now part-owned by the fund, Savile Row in London, along with other streets in the prestigious Mayfair district, a true feat of vision for the future generations. But if you think Norway's wealth has reached its peak, think again. It has now also discovered that one resource that would give an even bigger and infinite wealth. This would make the whole of Europe all line up and rely almost solely on Norway. And that resource is phosphate. For Norwegians, the term equality is not a cliché or a buzzword. It is ingrained in Norwegian culture and social life and has been prominent for generations, just as being polite and forming an orderly queue is to British people. In Norway, it's common to hear people express satisfaction with paying high taxes because they fund essential services like hospitals, schools, and pensions. Norwegians generally trust that their governments prioritize societal improvement and view them as benevolent institutions. In most other countries, the government is seen as a big bad wolf that is corrupt and run by people who only care about taking more money out of their pockets. Over the course of almost 7 decades, oil has not corrupted Norway. It's currently Britain's leading energy supplier and one of Europe's leading gas suppliers. Norway is gradually elevating itself to become one of, if not the most influential and powerful states in Europe. It made a record $131 billion in oil and gas revenues in 2023. They have been allocating tens of billions of dollars towards exploring untapped oil and gas deposits.